So I want you to try and put yourself in a very specific, just an incredibly frustrating scenario.
Okay.
Let's say you're sitting in a doctor's office, right? You're staring at the sterile white walls, and you are just entirely at the end of your rope.
Yeah, we've all been in that room.
Right, and for the last year, you've just felt fundamentally off. You drag yourself out of bed, your hair is, thinning in the shower drain, your libido is just a ghost of what it used to be. And despite eating what you think is this perfect diet and, exercising constantly, you have this spare tire of belly fat that simply refuses to budge.
It's a classic presentation.
Yeah, so the doctor finally walks in, holding your lab results, and he sits down, points to the single metric on the page, and gives you a diagnosis. He says your primary male hormone, testosterone, is failing you. But, he doesn't stop there. He implies that this hormone is actually kind of a dangerous liability anyway. It's the very thing setting you up for prostate cancer, a massive heart attack, and, the early loss of your hair.
Yeah, it's a devastating conversation. And, it happens thousands of times a day.
Thousands.
The medical establishment frames this situation as this binary mechanical failure. Like, the prevailing narrative is that your testicles, the glands themselves, are simply broken.
It's a broken machine.
Exactly. The tank is empty.
Right.
And simultaneously, you're being told that having high levels of this hormone is fundamentally hazardous to your long-term survival anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a huge paradox for the patient.
I find this fascinating because if I just put myself in the shoes of the average patient, I can see why this mainstream narrative is so easily accepted.
Right? Oh, absolutely.
The logic feels incredibly seductive. Think about the demographic realities here. Men suffer from earlier and more frequent cardiovascular disease than premenopausal women.
Right.
Men experience male pattern baldness while women generally don't. And most obviously, only men have prostates. So if you're just glancing at the surface, it seems like a straightforward game of connect the dots. If men have a specific dominant hormone and men suffer from these specific diseases, then the male hormone must be the driver of the male diseases. It makes so much sense on paper.
It really does. It's a beautiful hypothesis on the surface because, we are neurologically wired to seek out these visible, neatly categorized explanations for complex problems.
That's a simple answer.
Right. The problem, however, is that this correlation completely, and I mean completely, falls apart under rigorous physiological scrutiny.
Okay.
But because that surface logic is so comforting, mainstream endocrinology has just adopted a treatment model that views low T purely as a localized glandular failure.
Like a hardware problem.
Exactly. A hardware problem that must be overridden. They think, well, we just need to pump the body full of exogenous hormones, through intramuscular injections, topical gels, or those subcutaneous pellets.
Right.
The entire goal for them is to artificially inflate the numbers on that lab report until they fall back into some arbitrary normal reference range.
Which is, it's the equivalent of noticing your car is constantly running out of oil and your mechanic's only solution is to just hand you a funnel and a weekly jug of synthetic oil.
Yeah.
They never bother to put the car on a lift to find out why the engine block is hemorrhaging oil in the first place.
That is the perfect analogy, because it completely ignores the vast interconnected biological ecosystem of the human body.
Yeah.
It treats a systemic crisis as a localized defect. But, what if we step back and ask a more terrifying question?
Okay, what is it?
What if the foundational logic of modern endocrinology is entirely backward?
I love that. And that question is literally the entire mission of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
Because we are pulling from this incredibly dense, fascinating stack of research that is rooted in the bioenergetic model of health. So we're going to be specifically dissecting the frameworks built by researchers like Ray Peat, Georgi Dinkoff, and Jay Feldman.
Incredible minds.
Truly. And we are going to flip the mainstream script completely on its head. By the time we finish unpacking this research, you are going to view testosterone through a completely different lens.
You really will.
You won't see it as a dangerous variable that needs to be manipulated, suppressed, or feared. You'll understand it as a highly protective, pro-metabolic report card. It is the ultimate indicator of how your cells are producing energy at a microscopic level.
And to truly understand how to read that report card, we have to start by taking a sledgehammer to the most pervasive myth in men's health.
Let's do it.
We have to dismantle the foundational belief that testosterone is a biological spark that ignites prostate cancer.
Okay, let's start right there. Because the gasoline on a fire metaphor is, it's universally taught, right?
It's everywhere.
The assumption is that if a man has a developing prostate tumor, The absolute worst thing a doctor could do is introduce testosterone into his system, because the tumor would supposedly use that hormone as fuel and just like explode in growth.
Right, that was the unquestioned medical dogma for decades. But the bioenergetic framework demands that we look at the actual clinical data, not just the prevailing theory.
Right.
We need to look closely at this landmark event in the literature, commonly referred to in these circles as the Umikita earthquake, which was published in 1996.
The Umikita earthquake. Okay, so walk me through the actual methodology of this Umikita study. What exactly did they do that challenged the dogma so much?
Well, Umikita and his team designed a rigorously controlled experiment using animal models.
Yeah.
And they took subjects that had established actively growing prostate tumors.
So they already had cancer.
Yes. These were not precancerous cells. These were aggressive, fully formed carcinomas.
Wow. Okay.
Now, according to the mainstream gasoline on a fire theory, exposing these established tumors to an androgen should have accelerated their proliferation exponentially, right?
Right. It should have killed them faster.
But the researchers went ahead and treated these tumors directly with testosterone propionate.
I am just trying to imagine the expectation in that laboratory. Like, they must have been waiting with their clipboards to measure how fast the tumors doubled in size.
The expectation was absolutely massive growth. But the reality was a biological shockwave.
What happened?
The researchers didn't document accelerated growth. They documented what they termed massive necrosis with severe hemorrhage.
Wait, hold on. Let's break down the pathology there. Necrosis means premature, unprogrammed cell death. Correct.
Right.
So it's not just the cells naturally turning over, it's the tissue actively being destroyed.
Yes. The tumor cells were dying off en masse. The vascular structure feeding the cancer was literally collapsing, which caused the severe hemorrhage. And the timeline is probably the most staggering part.
How fast?
Within a single week of testosterone administration, the researchers observed total, complete tumor regression.
Wait, 1 week?
I am struggling to reconcile this. You take a tumor that supposedly feeds on testosterone, you basically drown it in testosterone, and it hemorrhages and dies in 7 days.
That's what the data showed. That completely obliterates the fundamental premise of standard oncology. But, I know the immediate criticism here.
Sure.
Skeptics are going to say, well, that's an isolated animal model. You can cure cancer in a rat 1,000 different ways. What happens in actual human men over decades?
And that skepticism is totally warranted, but the human clinical data aligns perfectly with the Umikita findings.
Really?
Yeah, we have robust longitudinal data from researchers like Ranico in 1981 and Wilson's extensive work in 1985. And they didn't look at isolated cells in a petri dish. They looked at living men diagnosed with prostate cancer.
Okay.
And they conducted these deep analyses of their systemic hormone profiles over time.
And what was the defining variable between the men who survived and the men who, succumbed to the disease?
It wasn't the absolute level of testosterone that predicted survival. It was the ratio.
The ratio of what?
Ranico and Wilson found that men with a higher ratio of testosterone to estradiol, estradiol being the most potent form of estrogen, actually had significantly better prostate cancer survival rates.
Wait, I need to pause and emphasize this for the listener.
Go ahead.
The men whose bodies maintain more of the so-called dangerous male hormone relative to estrogen actually lived longer with less aggressive disease.
Precisely. It is the exact inverse of what the mainstream narrative predicts. The presence of testosterone was actively correlating with survival, not demise.
Okay, but this raises a massive contradiction then.
How so?
We know prostate cancer exists. We know animal models can reliably induce prostate dysplasia and precancerous lesions. So, if testosterone isn't the villain driving the initial mutation and growth, what is? Something is causing the prostate tissue to go rogue.
Right, and this is where we uncover the true driver of the pathology. Because when researchers attempt to induce prostate dysplasia in animal models, they find something really fascinating.
What's that?
If you administer pure testosterone to an animal, the prostate remains entirely healthy. You literally cannot induce cancer with testosterone alone. The only reliable biological trigger, the specific condition that consistently forces prostate cells into a dysplastic precancerous state, is when you administer testosterone combined with estrogen.
Estrogen, the hormone we universally associate with female reproduction, though obviously, men produce small amounts of it naturally.
Yes. The actual culprit in prostate disease, and as the bioenergetic model argues, the driver of the entire cluster of symptoms typically blamed on high male hormones
Is estrogen.
is a state of estrogen dominance.
Yes, That's crazy.
And when you recognize estrogen as the true metabolic antagonist, it instantly resolves the cardiovascular paradox as well.
Right, the heart attack myth, because this is the second pillar of the anti-testosterone narrative, right? We're constantly warned that TRT thickens the blood, damages the myocardium, and inevitably leads to coronary events.
Oh, the other time.
But the source material highlights this 1996 study by Chu and colleagues on canine coronary arteries that completely dismantles this.
Oh, Cho's research fundamentally rewrites our understanding of cardiology and steroid hormones.
Tell me about it.
So they took canine models and studied the direct in vivo effects of testosterone on the coronary arteries, the vital vessels that supply blood and oxygen directly to the heart muscle.
And the mainstream assumption is that testosterone acts like a vice grip, right? Like it constricts the vessels, spikes blood pressure, and sets the stage for a heart attack.
That is the assumption.
Hmm.
But Chow's team demonstrated the exact opposite mechanism. They proved that testosterone is a potent active vasodilator.
Meaning it opens them up.
Exactly. When introduced to the coronary arteries, it actively widens them, significantly improving blood flow and oxygen delivery to the heart muscle.
I want to translate this visually just so I have it right.
Sure.
Imagine your coronary artery is a garden hose supplying water to a vital crop.
Good analogy.
The medical establishment tells you testosterone is like someone stepping heavily on the hose, restricting flow, increasing pressure behind the blockage, and starving the crop. But Chow's study proves testosterone is actually taking the pressure off. It's expanding the diameter of the hose so more water can rush through.
It is actively relieving the ischemic stress, yes. But the cardioprotective nature of testosterone goes way beyond simple vasodilation. The research shows that testosterone is positively inotropic and lusitropic.
Okay, you're going to need to unpack the medical jargon there because, how does a hormone change the mechanical pumping of the heart?
Let's look at the cellular mechanics. So, inotropic refers to the force of muscular contraction.
Okay.
When testosterone interacts with the cardiac cells, it actually enhances the influx of calcium ions during the contraction phase.
Okay, and calcium is what makes muscles fire.
Exactly. This means it actively improves the sheer force and efficiency of the heart muscle squeeze. It helps the heart pump a greater volume of blood with less wasted effort.
Oh, wow. So it's literally upgrading the horsepower of the engine.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
What about lusitropic? What does that mean?
Lusitropy is arguably even more critical. It refers to the heart's ability to actively relax between beats.
Relax. Why is that so important?
Because a failing, stressed heart becomes stiff. It can't expand fully to fill with blood before the next pump, but testosterone enhances the rapid reuptake of those calcium ions back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which allows the cardiac muscle fibers to completely disengage and relax.
So it's not just squeezing the sponge out with more force, it's allowing the sponge to completely expand, creating this vacuum to suck in a massive amount of fresh blood before the next squeeze.
Precisely. It optimizes both halves of the cardiac cycle. It fundamentally opposes the very mechanisms that lead to congestive heart failure.
This brings us to a really terrifying realization regarding standard medical care.
Yeah, it does.
Because if Chow proves testosterone protects the heart, and Umekita proves testosterone causes necrosis and prostate tumors, and the animal models prove estrogen is the actual trigger for dysplasia, what on earth are we doing to the millions of men currently undergoing standard oncology treatments?
It forces us to confront a pretty chilling reality about modern medicine.
Yeah.
Because the undisputed gold standard treatment for advanced prostate cancer is androgen deprivation therapy, or ADT.
Which is chemical castration.
It is. Oncologists prescribe drugs that completely obliterate a man's natural testosterone production, entirely based on that flawed, outdated belief that testosterone is the enemy.
Let me make sure I'm grasping the sheer gravity of this. Standard oncology is systematically eradicating the very hormone that induces tumor necrosis and protects the heart, while simultaneously leaving the man's estrogen levels largely unchecked.
Yes.
And estrogen is the exact hormone that drives the dysplasia in the first place.
If the bioenergetic framework is accurate, standard oncology isn't just making a slight miscalculation. They are actively disarming the body's primary pro-metabolic protective defense system while allowing the actual driver of the disease to thrive in a low-oxygen environment.
That is a profoundly heavy realization. It completely shifts the paradigm, but it leaves a glaring question hanging in the air.
Let's hear it.
If estrogen is the actual villain causing the prostate growth, the hair loss, and the stubborn body fat, how does a biological male end up with toxic levels of a female hormone?
Right.
We don't have ovaries. We aren't designed to have high circulating estrogen. Where is it coming from?
This is the crux of the issue, and it reveals a biological trap that mainstream TRT clinics almost universally fail to understand.
Okay.
Because to figure out where the estrogen is coming from, we have to look closely at an enzyme called aromatase.
The aromatase trap. I've heard bodybuilders talk about aromatase, but let's break down the actual biochemistry. What is this enzyme doing at a cellular level?
Aromatase is an enzyme located in various tissues throughout the body, particularly in fat cells, the brain, and the liver.
Okay.
And its biological function is to catalyze a very specific conversion. It takes androgens, specifically testosterone, and alters their molecular structure, converting them directly into estradiol, which is the most potent form of estrogen.
Wait, so testosterone isn't just a bystander here. It is the direct raw material.
Exactly. Testosterone is the mandatory substrate. The aromatase enzyme literally feeds on your testosterone to manufacture estrogen.
So if I can use a metaphor here, testosterone is the raw timber, and the aromatase enzyme is like a sawmill that chops that timber down into estrogen planks.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize it. Now, in a young, healthy man with a robust, thriving metabolism, the internal environment of the body actively suppresses aromatase activity.
The sawmill is powered down.
Yes. The factory doors are locked. Therefore, the testosterone your body produces stays as testosterone. But as men age, or in bioenergetic terms, as their cellular metabolic rate degrades, certain environmental and dietary triggers force that enzyme to upregulate. They turn the sawmill on full blast.
And this is where the modern lifestyle becomes a disaster.
Absolutely.
What are the specific triggers that power up this estrogen factory?
The bioenergetic research highlights 4 primary drivers of aromatase upregulation. First, the overconsumption of polyunsaturated fats, or PUFAs, which we commonly know as seed oils.
Seed oils.
Second, the presence of gut endotoxin, which are bacterial poisons leaking from a sluggish digestive tract into the bloodstream.
Okay.
Third, chronic psychological and physiological stress. And fourth, excess adipose tissue, or body fat, which itself acts as a massive storage organ for the aromatase enzyme.
Diet, digestion, stress, and body weight. Basically the 4 horsemen of modern health.
But the critical insight from Ray Peat's work is that these are not 4 independent diseases. They are all distinct symptoms of the exact same underlying pathology.
Which is?
A systemic energy deficit. When your cells cannot produce enough usable energy, they enter a state of biological panic. And that panic-stressed state is what upregulates aromatase as a desperate defense mechanism.
So let's apply this biological trap to the real world. Let's look at this incredibly common, frustrating scenario that is playing out in anti-aging clinics across the country right now.
Okay, paint the picture.
You have a guy in his early 40s. He's incredibly stressed about his mortgage, his career. His gut is a wreck from eating out. His diet is loaded with invisible seed oils from restaurant food, and he's carrying an extra 20 pounds of belly fat.
Very common.
Right. So he feels exhausted. He has no libido. He goes to a TRT clinic, and the doctor hands him a syringe of exogenous testosterone. What happens the moment he injects that hormone?
Well, we have to look at the environment he's injecting it into, because he is in a chronic state of cellular energy deficit, stressed, inflamed, loaded with PUFAs.
Right.
His aromatase levels are astronomically high. The sawmill is running at maximum capacity, so he injects a massive bolus of exogenous testosterone into his muscle tissue. His body doesn't see a protective hormone. His body sees a massive influx of raw timber.
Oh, man.
It immediately runs that injected testosterone straight through the overactive aromatase enzyme, converting a huge percentage of it directly into estradiol.
So he paid hundreds of dollars to get a testosterone injection, and his body essentially hijacked it and turned it into an estrogen injection.
Precisely. The body metabolizes the supposed cure into the exact hormone driving his pathology.
I am genuinely struggling to understand the medical blindness here. Like, what happens when this guy goes back for his follow-up consultation a month later?
Yeah.
He's sitting across from the doctor, and he says, "Doc, I actually feel worse. My libido is totally dead. I'm moody. I'm retaining a massive amount of water in my face, and my joints ache." Do these clinicians not realize they're feeding the trap?
The tragic irony of the modern TRT clinic is their absolute reliance on the snapshot lab number over the metabolic reality of the patient.
They just look at the paper.
Exactly. The doctor looks at the blood work, sees that the total testosterone hasn't climbed to the optimal range, primarily because it was all aromatized away, and concludes that the patient simply needs a higher dose.
You cute.
No, they escalate the protocol. They give him a bigger syringe.
Which is like throwing a bigger pile of timber into a sawmill and expecting a different outcome. They are unknowingly stoking the fires of estrogen dominance. But we keep using that phrase, estrogen dominance, and I want to ground it in hard biology. Biochemically, what is that excess estrogen actually doing to this man's cells to make him feel so awful? Why is estrogen the villain in this story?
To understand the danger of estrogen, we really have to zoom all the way down into the mitochondria, the microscopic power plants inside every cell in your body.
Okay, zooming in.
Estrogen is fundamentally and aggressively anti-metabolic. At the cellular level, estrogen directly impairs mitochondrial respiration.
How does it do that?
It physically interferes with the enzymes in the electron transport chain, which prevents the mitochondria from effectively using oxygen to create ATP, which is the currency of cellular energy.
So if oxygen can't be used, estrogen is literally suffocating the cell from the inside out.
It induces a state of localized tissue hypoxia. The cells are starved of oxygen. And when a human cell cannot utilize oxygen to manufacture energy cleanly, it is forced to regress into an inefficient, primitive backup system just to survive.
What kind of backup system?
It shifts into a hypoxic, lactic acid-producing state.
Lactic acid, I know that feeling. That's the intense, painful burn you get in your quads when you sprint up a hill and your muscles run out of oxygen.
Exactly. That is anaerobic glycolysis. Now imagine your entire systemic biology being forced into that emergency state constantly by high circulating estrogen.
That sounds miserable.
It is. And this brings us full circle to the cancer conversation. Because we have known since the work of Otto Warburg in the 1920s, the famous Warburg effect, that a hypoxic lactic acid-rich environment is the foundational prerequisite for uncontrolled cellular proliferation.
Wow.
It is the exact metabolic soil in which tumors take root and thrive.
So the cascading horror story goes like this. The clinic gives a stressed, energy-depleted man testosterone.
Yeah.
His stressed body converts it into estrogen. That estrogen shuts down his mitochondria, suffocates his cells, and creates a highly acidic, low-oxygen environment that sets the stage for prostate dysplasia.
That is the complete anatomy of the aromatase trap.
So how on earth do we escape the trap? If the bioenergetic model says that injecting testosterone just feeds the estrogen sawmill, do we just give up? Is there no solution for low T?
You don't give up on testosterone, but you completely abandon the brute force mechanical approach. You cannot simply force a lab number up with a needle and expect health to follow.
Right.
Ray Peat's framework dictates that you must fix the biological environment first. You have to remove the seed oils, heal the intestinal permeability to stop the endotoxin, and restore the basal metabolic rate via the thyroid.
You have to power down the sawmill.
You have to actively power down the aromatase sawmill.
You fix the environment, and the body stops sabotaging itself, which naturally leads us to the next vital piece of this puzzle. If we shouldn't just rely on a needle, how does a thriving, healthy human body actually manufacture testosterone in the first place? And this brings us right back to those microscopic power plants we just mentioned.
Right. To truly grasp the role of testosterone, you have to stop hyper-focusing on the testicles as some sort of isolated, independent machine. You have to look at the entire systemic energy grid of the human body.
Because the sources outline a concept that I think is the most empowering part of this entire deep dive. They say testosterone is an energy marker. The body only produces it in abundance when the cellular production of ATP is incredibly high.
Yes.
So when a 45-year-old guy is told he has low T, he doesn't have a broken testicle, he is experiencing a downstream symptom. It's like a check engine light flashing on the dashboard, warning him that his cellular energy production has collapsed.
That's exactly it. We have to remember that hormones do not act randomly. They are chemical messengers. They are constantly communicating the status of the environment to the rest of the body. When mitochondrial energy production is high, the body registers a state of abundance and safety. It shifts into a parasympathetic, restorative mode. It decides it has the surplus energy required to invest in luxury biological processes, tissue repair, building dense muscle mass, and reproduction.
And the chemical signal that authorizes all of those luxury projects is testosterone.
Exactly.
I love visualizing the body as a massive manufacturing corporation.
Let's hear the analogy.
Well, when the corporation is highly profitable, when the energy grid is fully powered and resources are abundant, Management greenlights the long-term, high-quality projects. They build new infrastructure, they invest in R&D, they produce luxury goods. In this metaphor, testosterone is the luxury good. It is the hormone of surplus.
But what happens to corporate strategy when the factory starts failing? What happens when the energy grid falters because of poor thyroid function, or the machinery is damaged by oxidized seed oils, or the company is starved of raw materials due to chronic fasting?
The factory instantly shifts into crisis mode. Because if you are struggling just to keep the lights on, you don't build luxury goods. You halt all long-term projects, and you divert every single available resource to the emergency backup generators just to survive the night.
And in human biochemistry, those emergency backup generators are fueled by cortisol.
Cortisol, the stress hormone.
Cortisol is the ultimate antagonist to testosterone. The relationship between the two is a direct antagonistic seesaw.
How does that seesaw work?
When cellular energy falters, the hypothalamus signals the adrenals to flood the system with cortisol. Cortisol's primary job in a crisis is to mobilize emergency fuel, and it does this by literally breaking down your own muscle and organ tissue into amino acids so the liver can convert them into glucose.
It is cannibalizing the factory to feed the furnace.
Exactly.
And as that cortisol spikes to save your life, what happens to the testosterone production?
It crashes to near zero. Chronically elevated cortisol actively and aggressively suppresses the hypothalamic pituitary striatal axis. The body is essentially screaming, "We do not have the energetic resources to build muscle or reproduce right now. We're simply trying not to starve to death."
So if we want to turn the factory back on and start producing luxury goods again, how does the body actually manufacture testosterone? The source documents break down the steroidogenesis pathway in detail, and in doing so, they completely shatter another massive dogma of modern medicine. Let's walk through the actual biological assembly line.
Well, the assembly line begins with a molecule that has been perhaps the most unfairly maligned and demonized substance in the history of medicine.
And that is
Cholesterol.
dietary cholesterol, the exact substance that cardiologists have been telling us to avoid in eggs, butter, and red meat since, the Enselke's lipid hypothesis took over in the 1970s.
Yeah, that's the one. The bioenergetic framework rejects that demonization in its entirety. Biochemically speaking, cholesterol is the essential, non-negotiable raw material. It is the fundamental building block for every single steroid hormone your body produces, including testosterone.
So if cholesterol is the foundational raw material, what is step one on the steroid assembly line?
The body takes that cholesterol molecule, transports it inside the mitochondria, and enzymatically cleaves it to create a hormone called pregnenolone.
Pregnenolone?
Pregnenolone is absolutely vital. Endocrinologists often refer to it as the grandmother steroid, because as practically every other protective steroid hormone cascades downward from it.
Okay, so we have cholesterol converting to pregnenolone. What happens next?
Pregnenolone undergoes further enzymatic conversion to become DHEA, and finally, that DHEA is converted directly into testosterone.
The pipeline seems incredibly straightforward, right? Cholesterol to pregnenolone, down to DHEA, down to testosterone. But there is a massive bottleneck in this factory, isn't there? A place where the whole assembly line jams up.
There is a severe bottleneck, and this is another area where the mainstream model really fails its patients. Because the very first step of that conversion, taking raw cholesterol and turning it into pregnenolone, is highly dependent on two strictly required cofactors.
What are they?
Adequate levels of active thyroid hormone, known as T3, and bioavailable vitamin A.
So T3 is basically the master key that unlocks the door to the whole factory.
Exactly. T3 is required to stimulate the STAR protein, the steroidogenic acute regulatory protein, which physically transports the cholesterol into the mitochondria so it could be converted.
Okay.
Without sufficient active thyroid hormone, that transport halts. The conversion process stalls entirely. You could eat a dozen eggs a day and have all the raw cholesterol in the world circulating in your bloodstream. But if your thyroid function is sluggish, you cannot convert it into pregnenolone, and therefore you cannot manufacture testosterone.
I am having a massive light bulb moment here.
Yeah.
This perfectly explains the tragic paradox of that middle-aged man at the doctor's office.
Yep, put the pieces together.
He comes in with symptoms of low T, and the doctor runs his blood work. The doctor says, your testosterone is terribly low, and to make matters worse, your total cholesterol is dangerously high.
Exactly.
So the doctor puts him on a statin drug to artificially crush his cholesterol and gives him a testosterone injection. But the bioenergetic model is saying that cholesterol is only high because it's backing up on the assembly line. The factory doors are locked because he doesn't have enough active thyroid hormone.
It is a profound, catastrophic misunderstanding of human physiology.
It's crazy.
The high cholesterol isn't a disease, it is a symptom of a blocked pathway. By prescribing a statin, the doctor is forcefully eliminating the raw materials, ensuring the patient can never naturally produce hormones again.
Yeah.
And this systemic failure ties directly into the work of Georgy Dinkoff and his bioenergetic definition of what we casually call aging.
I really want to dive into Haidut's work here. What is biochemically happening to a man as he hits his late 30s, 40s, and 50s? We just accept that we get old and fall apart, but what is the actual mechanism?
Dinkoff observes that youth is not some magical state. It is a specific biochemical environment characterized by high, robust circulating levels of protective anti-stress steroids.
And those are?
Those are pregnenolone, DHEA, progesterone, and testosterone. Those hormones act as a shield, constantly keeping cortisol and estrogen in check.
Okay.
But as a man crosses the threshold of roughly age 35, the cumulative damage of a poor diet, stress, and PUFA accumulation degrades his metabolic rate. And the production of those protective hormones drops off a cliff.
So the seesaw violently tips.
Yes. The protective steroid shield vanishes, leaving cortisol, the highly catabolic tissue-destroying stress hormone, increasingly unopposed.
Wow.
And it begins to ravage the body. It breaks down muscle, thins the skin, suppresses the immune system, and drives systemic inflammation.
So aging, in the way we experience it, isn't just the inevitable rusting of the biological gears. It is actually a massive shift in the hormonal ratio. You lose the protective hormones because your energy production fails, the stress hormones take the wheel, and they just tear the vehicle apart from the inside. The factory is simply losing power.
That is the bioenergetic reality of the aging process.
It is so radically different from the narrative we are spoon-fed. And it sounds almost inconceivable that modern medicine, with all of its advanced technology, could get the testosterone story this fundamentally wrong. But I was reading through the sources, and it turns out this isn't the first time the medical establishment has completely dismissed the reality of hormones because of their own arrogance, right? History is rhyming here.
It is a fascinating parallel. To understand the modern, stubborn resistance to the bioenergetic model, we really have to travel back to the late 19th century, to 1889, and examine the story of Charles Edward Brown-Séquard.
This is hands down one of the wildest historical footnotes in the entire stack of research. Because Brown-Séquard was not a French quack. He was a very prominent, highly respected physiologist.
Oh, very well known.
And in 1889, at the age of 72, he decides he is going to conduct a radical self-experiment.
It's a very bold, highly controversial experiment. He formulated an aqueous extract, meaning a water-based solution derived from the testicles of dogs and guinea pigs.
Wow.
And he proceeded to inject this extract directly into his own body.
Which, to modern ears, sounds both insane and highly unsanitary. But setting the gross-up factor aside, what were his actual documented results?
He reported experiencing massive, undeniable, rejuvenating effects. He meticulously documented dramatic, sustained improvements in his physical strength, his muscular endurance, his cognitive focus, the return of his bowel function, and just a massive surge in overall vitality.
He felt younger.
He essentially reported to the scientific community that he had turned back the clock and felt decades younger.
And he presented these findings at a major scientific conference. How did his peers react? Did they hail him as a pioneer of endocrinology?
They mocked him mercilessly. He was laughed out of the room. The scientific establishment of the late 19th century completely and utterly rejected his claims.
Why?
And the tragedy is, they didn't just dismiss him as an eccentric. They claimed to have absolute, undeniable scientific proof that he was either lying or experiencing a massive placebo effect.
Wait, how could they prove he was lying? What was their scientific rationale?
Their argument was based on an elementary, overly simplified understanding of chemistry. They stated, we know that steroid hormones, the active biological components in testicular tissue, are lipids. They are oily molecules.
Okay, true.
We also know that oil and water fundamentally do not mix. Therefore, a water-based extract cannot possibly hold lipid hormones in suspension. So they concluded with absolute certainty that his aqueous extract could not contain any active testosterone.
They basically told a 72-year-old man who just regained his youth that he was injecting nothing but expensive, gross water, and his results were all in his head.
Exactly. They entirely dismissed his lived physical reality because it contradicted their rigid, simplistic model of chemistry.
But Ray Peat looked back at this historical event and pointed out that the establishment's scientific dismissal was itself incredibly ignorant. Why was Brown-Séquard actually right? What did the 19th century chemists miss?
Pete pointed out a foundational truth about biology that the chemists failed to grasp. And that is, living organ tissue is not just a sterile test tube of water. Living tissue is densely packed with natural phospholipids and proteins.
And what do phospholipids do? They act like biological soaks, right? They emulsify the oil so they can dissolve in water.
Precisely. The natural phospholipids readily solubilize those oily lipid steroid molecules into the water-based fluid of the extract.
Oh, wow.
The hormones were present in the extract, and they were highly active. Brown-Séquard was experiencing real, potent hormonal rejuvenation.
He was right all along. He discovered the dawn of hormone replacement therapy, and he died a punchline because the establishment was too arrogant to realize their model of chemistry was incomplete.
It is a profound, recurring historical lesson for us today, because we see the exact same pattern. Real protective biological effects are frequently mislabeled as impossible or paradoxically labeled as dangerous by a medical establishment that is stubbornly financially invested in the wrong model.
Yeah.
Brown-Séquard was ridiculed for discovering exogenous hormones. Today, the bioenergetic model is marginalized for pointing out that exogenous testosterone feeds the aromatase trap. The arrogance of the establishment remains the constant.
That brings us to the ultimate turning point of this deep dive, because we've mapped out the flaws in the mainstream model. We understand the mechanics of the aromatase trap. We see that low T is fundamentally an energy crisis, a starving factory shutting down production. And we have the historical context to confidently challenge the establishment. So now we have to get intensely practical. Let's open the toolkit.
If the goal is to fix the metabolic environment so testosterone can return naturally and robustly, you have to approach the protocol in distinct phases, and the very first phase is strict damage control.
Oh, okay.
Before we try to build anything, we have to stop the bleeding.
Right. Before we can rebuild the factory, we have to stop actively burning it down. The protocol here is extremely specific, and the absolute #1 item on the stop list, the non-negotiable first step, is the elimination of seed oils.
Polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs. The modern food supply is drowning in them. Canola oil, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. They must be aggressively eliminated from the diet immediately.
Now, I need to push back here because this directly contradicts mainstream advice. The American Heart Association still puts their heart-healthy stamp on bottles of canola oil, arguing that polyunsaturated fats lower LDL cholesterol. Why is the bioenergetic model so intensely focused on eliminating them? What are they biochemically doing to a man's hormones?
They attack the metabolic system at literally every level of the hierarchy. First, due to their multiple double bonds, PUFAs are highly unstable molecules. When exposed to the heat and oxygen inside the human body, they rapidly oxidize, creating massive amounts of reactive oxygen species.
Wow.
This oxidative stress directly damages the mitochondria.
They literally rust inside of you.
That is a very accurate description of lipid peroxidation. But their hormonal suppression is even more direct. PUFAs aggressively suppress thyroid function. They inhibit the actual secretion of the hormone from the thyroid gland. They block its transport proteins in the blood. And most damagingly, they physically block the thyroid hormone from binding to the receptors on the cells.
And as we established earlier, if you block the thyroid hormone, you lock the door on the cholesterol to testosterone assembly line, the factory goes dark.
Exactly. But the damage compounds. Remember the panic state of the cell. When the mitochondria are damaged by oxidized PUFAs and cannot use oxygen, the cell panics. And in that stressed hypoxic state, the body aggressively upregulates the aromatase enzyme.
So seed oils not only block you from manufacturing new testosterone, they take whatever small amount of testosterone you do manage to produce, and they shove it straight into the aromatase sawmill to be turned into estrogen.
They are the ultimate metabolic poison in the context of men's health. And right alongside them on the stop list, the sources explicitly categorize specific endocrine disruptors.
Like what?
Unfermented soy products, chronic alcohol consumption, and exposure to BP plastics.
How bad are the plastics, really? Is it just a micro-optimization?
It is not a micro-optimization. In numerous animal models, consistent exposure to these substances is documented to cause actual physical testicular degeneration. They don't just lower the lab number, they physically damage the hardware, sharply raise systemic estrogen, and induce feminization of the tissue.
Okay, so dropping the seed oils, the soy, and the plastic water bottles makes intuitive sense. But this next part of the STOP protocol, I think this is going to shock and probably anger a lot of people listening, because the habits we need to stop are heavily, heavily promoted in modern fitness culture as the ultimate biohacks for men.
You're referring to the stress diets and the extreme exercise regimens.
Yes, the holy trinity of modern optimization. Low-carb diets, intermittent fasting, and intense chronic cardio. If you go on any fitness forum, guys trying to raise their testosterone are doing exactly these three things.
Yeah, all the time.
They wake up at 5 a.m., they skip breakfast to extend their fast, they go run 5 miles or do a grueling HIE workout, and then they break their fast with a massive steak and no carbohydrates. You are telling me this entire routine is on the stop list?
It is at the very top of the stop list.
Yeah.
And to understand why, we have to look deeply at the physiology of liver glycogen and the HPA axis. When you intentionally fast for 16 hours or when you drastically restrict carbohydrates, you completely deplete the stored sugar, the glycogen, in your liver.
And why does the liver glycogen matter so much?
Because your brain requires a massive, constant, uninterrupted stream of glucose to survive. If your liver glycogen is empty, the body registers a state of extreme metabolic crisis. It views this intentional fasting as genuine starvation.
And what does the body do when it panics about starving? It reaches for the emergency backup generator.
It floods the system with massive amounts of cortisol. Because you refuse to eat carbohydrates, cortisol is deployed to initiate a process called gluconeogenesis.
What's that?
Cortisol physically breaks down your own lean muscle tissue, turns it into free amino acids, and sends it to the liver to be painfully converted into emergency glucose just to keep your brain functioning.
It is cannibalizing the factory. And remember the seesaw. If cortisol is constantly spiking to keep your brain fueled because you refuse to eat a carb, what is happening to your testosterone?
It is actively suppressed. Chronically elevated cortisol entirely shuts down the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, and adding chronic cardio to this fasted state dramatically compounds the damage.
Oh, so.
Prolonged, intense exercise like marathon training or daily CrossFit in a glycogen-depleted state produces a well-documented clinical condition called exercise-induced hypothyroidism.
Exercise-induced hypothyroidism. The exercise is literally suppressing the thyroid gland.
Yes. The body recognizes that you are burning an astronomical amount of energy without adequate fuel coming in. To protect you from starving to death, it actively downregulates your basal metabolic rate.
Wow.
It lowers your thyroid output, which drops your body temperature, slows your pulse, and halts testosterone production. It leaves young, incredibly fit-looking, shredded men with the systemic hormonal profiles of the frail elderly.
That is mind-blowing. The guy on the treadmill sweating for an hour while fasting genuinely thinks he's biohacking his way to health, but his body thinks he is running away from a predator during a famine. It shuts down all luxury production just to keep him alive.
Exactly. Which brings us to the final, highly controversial warning on the stop list. We have to fundamentally rethink our obsession with massive protein consumption and stimulant pre-workouts.
The sources outline a rule that defies everything I've ever heard in a gym. They suggest capping protein intake at roughly 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. The golden rule in fitness is 1 gram per pound minimum, sometimes 2. Why would we cap protein?
Because the body does not have a mechanism to store excess protein. If you consume massive amounts of protein, but you keep your carbohydrates artificially low, the body treats that excess protein as a stressor.
Really?
It has to undergo a highly energy-expensive process called deamination to strip the nitrogen away and convert those excess amino acids into glucose anyway, and it relies on stress hormones to drive that conversion.
It's an incredibly inefficient, stressful way to make the sugar your body wanted in the first place. And we also need to ditch the artificial sweeteners and the nitric oxide boosters found in those neon-colored pre-workout powders.
Yes, those chemical additives introduce systemic stress and actively irritate the intestinal lining. That irritation increases gut permeability, allowing endotoxin to leak into the bloodstream, which, as we discussed, is a primary trigger for the aromatase trap.
Okay, we've established the perimeter. We have stopped the drain, no seed oils, no fasting, no low-carb diets, no chronic cardio, and sensible protein.
Right.
Now that the emergency alarms are finally turned off, how do we actually fuel the massive ATP production required to build high testosterone? How do we start the engine?
This is where we transition to the START protocol. And the foundational step is radically simple, yet incredibly difficult for modern dieters to accept.
Which is?
You must consume enough total energy.
Fueling the factory.
The bioenergetic baseline for a male is a minimum of 2,500 calories a day. But it's not just about the gross caloric intake. it is heavily dependent on the macronutrient composition.
Okay.
The absolute vital requirement here is the consumption of 150 to 300 plus grams of carbohydrates every single day.
300 grams of carbs a day. The keto and carnivore crowds just collectively gasped. I can hear the pushback. If I eat 300 grams of carbs, I'm going to spike my insulin, get diabetes, and gain 50 pounds. Where are these carbohydrates supposed to come from to avoid that?
We are not talking about processed flour, high fructose corn syrup, or donuts. The sources specifically emphasize easily digestible, highly bioavailable sources of energy.
Like what?
Ripe fruits, pure fruit juices, raw honey, white rice, and well-cooked root vegetables like potatoes.
Why these specific sources? What makes them different?
Because these simple carbohydrates are the body's preferred, absolute most efficient fuel for generating ATP in the mitochondria. When you flood a stress system with usable, clean carbohydrates, you immediately lower cortisol.
Okay.
You're sending a profound biochemical signal to the hypothalamus that says, the famine is over. We have abundant energy in the environment.
I see.
This vigorous supply of glucose strongly supports the conversion of thyroid hormone in the liver. It spares your protein so it can be used for muscle repair, and it provides the energetic safety required for testosterone production to come back online.
And the timing of these carbohydrates is critical, isn't it? The sources highlight a non-negotiable rule called the 30-minute breakfast.
This is perhaps the most powerful behavioral intervention in the bioenergetic model. You must consume a real meal containing a balance of carbohydrates and protein within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up in the morning.
I want to address the listener directly here. I know your morning routine. You are probably rushing out the door at 7 a.m., grabbing a massive cup of black coffee, and thinking you are doing your waistline a huge favor by skipping breakfast and fasting until noon. But I want the expert to explain exactly what is happening to your stress hormones while you sit in that morning traffic on an empty stomach. Why is the 30-minute breakfast so urgent?
It all comes down to the cortisol awakening response.
Well,
Overnight, while you are sleeping and fasting, your liver slowly depletes its glycogen stores to keep your brain alive. By the time you wake up, your cortisol levels are naturally peaking.
wow.
The cortisol is surging to initiate gluconeogenesis to keep your blood sugar stable. If you wake up, drink black coffee, which further stimulates adrenaline and cortisol, and refuse to eat, that cortisol surge continues to climb violently.
So you're just stressed.
It sets a highly catabolic stress tone for the entire day, crushing your testosterone production before you even get to the office.
By eating that fruit and protein immediately, you are literally breaking the fast. You are halting the stress response and signaling safety to the factory. So we have carbs in place. What about fats? We said absolutely no seed oils. Does that mean we eat a low-fat diet?
Absolutely not. Fat is crucial for steroidogenesis. The protocol dictates that 20 to 40% of your daily caloric intake should come from highly saturated fats,
Saturated fats, the exact fats we've been told cause atherosclerosis and heart attacks.
which we established through the CHO study, and a proper understanding of lipid peroxidation is a complete misunderstanding of vascular pathology. The sources heavily emphasize fats like grass-fed butter, beef tallow, ghee, and coconut oil.
Why do we specifically want saturated fats? What makes them superior to the seed oils?
It comes down to molecular stability. Because saturated fats lack double bonds, they are incredibly stable. They do not oxidize, they do not create reactive oxygen species, and they do not damage your mitochondria when exposed to heat.
Okay, that makes sense.
More importantly, saturated fat directly supports androgen synthesis. The body utilizes it highly efficiently, and it minimizes the upregulation of the aromatase enzyme, keeping testosterone from converting into estrogen.
It is the premium, stable raw material for the factory. Now, there is another nutrient we need to add to this protocol, and it's one that almost every major health organization tells us to actively restrict. Salt.
The bioenergetic requirement is 3 to 6 grams of pure sodium per day, salted aggressively to taste.
Why is so much salt? I'm struggling to see how salt connects to testosterone.
It connects through the mechanisms of cellular energy and stress. First, sodium is strictly required for cellular glucose absorption.
Really?
The sodium-potassium pumps on the cell membrane require sodium to physically transport the sugar from the blood into the cell so the mitochondria can make ATP. If you aggressively restrict salt, you cannot get the fuel into the factory.
You are locking the delivery trucks out.
Exactly. Furthermore, adequate salt is the primary regulator of adrenaline. When you restrict sodium, your blood volume drops. The body perceives this drop in blood pressure as an emergency, and it spikes adrenaline and aldosterone to compensate and force the blood vessels to constrict.
So you're just running on adrenaline.
If you eat a low-salt diet, you're keeping yourself in a chronic adrenaline-fueled stress state, which inherently opposes testosterone production.
Okay, so we are eating abundant carbs, saturated fat, and plenty of salt. Now, I want to get into the very specific tactical bioenergetic interventions mentioned in the sources. These are the unique biohacks of the repeat world. First on the list is the daily raw carrot salad. What is this and what is it actually doing physiologically?
The raw carrot salad is a classic, highly effective PEAT intervention. The recipe is simple. 1 medium raw carrot, shredded lengthwise, mixed with a teaspoon of refined coconut oil, a splash of white vinegar, and a pinch of salt. You eat this daily, ideally on an empty stomach between meals.
It sounds like a strange fibrous snack. Why specifically a raw carrot?
It is all about the unique properties of the raw carrot fiber. It is highly antimicrobial, but it is almost entirely indigestible by the human gut.
Okay.
As this fibrous matrix moves through your digestive tract, it acts like a physical sponge. It binds directly to endotoxin, the bacterial poisons in your intestines, and it also binds to excess estrogen that the liver has conjugated and excreted into the bile.
And because the fiber is indigestible, it carries those toxins and that estrogen completely out of the body in the stool, preventing them from being reabsorbed into the bloodstream.
Precisely. It is a daily mechanical sweep of the gut that directly lowers the endotoxin burden, thereby removing one of the major triggers of the aromatase trap.
Amazing. Next tactical addition. Consuming beef liver once a week?
Liver is often called nature's multivitamin, but its primary crucial purpose in this specific protocol is the delivery of vitamin A. Remember the bottleneck in the steroidogenesis factory.
The conversion of cholesterol into pregnenolone strictly requires active T3 and vitamin A.
Yes. Liver provides the most bioavailable, potent source of retinol, true vitamin A, to unlock that pathway.
Unlocking the factory doors. Now, what about direct supplementation? The sources mention taking actual hormonal precursors?
Yes, the protocol suggests supplementing with low-dose pregnenolone and DHEA, the grandmother steroid, and its immediate downstream partner.
But the dosing instructions here are incredibly specific and very low, like 5 to 10 milligrams, maybe up to 50 milligrams maximum, and they must be dissolved in fat. Why is it a low dose? If these are the precursors to testosterone, wouldn't taking 200 milligrams be better?
No, and this is where many men go wrong. If you dump massive supraphysiological amounts of DHEA into a stress system, say 100 milligrams or more, the body gets overwhelmed.
Then what happens?
The overactive aromatase enzyme will grab that excess DHEA and run it straight through the sawmill, turning it into massive amounts of estrogen.
It feeds the trap.
Exactly. Low doses, specifically dissolved in a long-chain fat like butter, olive oil, or vitamin E, absorb slowly through the lymphatic system. This slow lymphatic absorption bypasses the rapid destruction of the liver pass and gently encourages the body to slowly ramp up its own natural testosterone production.
And there is one more hormone mentioned in the sources, and I guarantee this is going to shock the listeners. The protocol explicitly suggests that men might need to supplement with progesterone.
It is shocking to most because progesterone is universally and incorrectly labeled strictly as the female pregnancy hormone, but men naturally synthesize it as well.
Why on earth does a biological male need a pregnancy hormone?
Because progesterone is actually the body's primary foundational anti-stress hormone for both sexes. It forcefully opposes the toxic effects of estrogen. It actively blocks cortisol from binding at the cellular receptor level, and it is a potent neurosteroid that promotes deep, restorative, slow-wave sleep. By introducing low-dose progesterone, you provide the systemic biological safety signal that forces the body to downregulate aromatase, block cortisol, and resume producing testosterone.
It is the ultimate shield for the factory. Okay, let's pull all of this together. You are following the protocol. You've stopped the fasting and the seed oils. You are eating the carbs, resting, eating the carrot salad, getting your sunlight, taking your precursors. How do you actually know if it's working?
That is a crucial practical question.
Right, because the average guy thinks the only way to track his progress is to go to the clinic every month and pay hundreds of dollars for a blood draw just to look at a single snapshot number.
But a blood draw is exactly that, a frozen snapshot in time. It does not tell you how your cells are actually producing energy hour by hour throughout the day. To know that, you need functional, real-time metabolic diagnostics. And the two most reliable, accurate tools you have are completely free, your oral temperature and your resting pulse.
The thermometer and the stopwatch. Explain the mechanics of this. What exactly are we tracking when we take our temperature?
You are tracking the actual heat output of your cellular mitochondria. This is thermogenesis. When your cells are efficiently turning carbohydrates into ATP, facilitated by active thyroid hormone, they produce heat as a metabolic byproduct,
Okay.
to put it simply. When your thyroid is strong and your metabolism is high, your body runs warm.
So what are the specific targets we should be looking for? Let's start with the morning. You just open your eyes.
Your waking oral temperature, taken while you're still in bed before you move around, should be above 97.8 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, 97.8. Then you get up and eat your 30-minute breakfast. Carbs, protein, salt. What happens next?
Roughly 45 minutes to an hour after breakfast, you take your temperature again. It should rise naturally to between 98.2 and 98.6 degrees.
Now, here is a fascinating, crucial detail from the sources. What does it mean if a man's temperature actually drops after he eats breakfast? Say he wakes up at 98.0, he eats his fruit and eggs, and an hour later he is shivering at 97.5.
That is a massive metabolic red flag. If your temperature drops after eating, it means that your morning warmth was completely artificial. It was not driven by a healthy thyroid. It was driven by pure stress adrenaline.
Wait, adrenaline can make you physically warm?
Yes, stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol can artificially raise your body temperature as they force the body to break down tissue for energy. But when you eat those carbohydrates at breakfast, you signal safety.
Right.
You lower the stress hormones, the adrenaline turns off. And if your underlying thyroid function is actually sluggish, your temperature crashes because you no longer have the adrenaline propping it up.
Wow. So eating reveals the metabolic truth. It strips away the stress mask.
Exactly. Now, moving through the day, by the afternoon peak, around 2 or 3 p.m., your temperature should be peaking at its highest point, between 98.6 and 99.0 degrees Fahrenheit.
And what about the pulse? What is the target there?
Your resting pulse, taken while seated and relaxed, should be strong, steady, and optimally between 75 and 85 beats per minute.
Let's decode these patterns because the combinations tell a very specific biological story. What does it mean if a guy has a consistently low temperature, say he's always in the 96s, and a very slow pulse, like 50 beats per minute?
Low temperature plus a slow pulse equals profound metabolic hibernation. The thyroid is completely suppressed, the cellular factory is shut down, and the body is running on absolute minimum power just to keep the organs alive.
So no testosterone.
Testosterone production in this hibernating state will be near zero.
And what about the opposite scenario? What if he has a low temperature, but a very high racing pulse, say 96.5 degrees, but his heart is pounding at 95 beats a minute while just sitting on the couch?
That is the classic signature of adrenaline compensating for a failing thyroid. The body is cold and desperately lacks cellular energy, so the adrenals are pumping massive amounts of adrenaline constantly just to force the heart to beat faster, to circulate whatever meager energy is left to keep you conscious.
Wow.
It is a state of extreme, exhausting systemic stress.
And in both of those states, hibernation or adrenaline overdrive, the aromatase trap is wide open, turning whatever testosterone you have directly into estrogen.
Precisely. The goal is a warm temperature and a strong, moderate pulse. That signifies a high-energy, low-stress environment where testosterone can flourish.
Okay, so a listener starts the protocol tomorrow. They dish the seed oils, eat the carbs, track their temps. What is the realistic timeline for recovery here? Because the allure of the TRT clinic is that you get an injection on Tuesday, and by Friday you feel a massive artificial rush of libido and energy. This bioenergetic protocol is a foundational rebuilding process. What should they expect week by week?
You have to be patient and trust the physiology, but the milestones of recovery are very clear. Weeks 1 and 2 are almost entirely about glycogen refilling. As you finally start eating enough carbohydrates and salt, your chronically depleted liver and muscle tissue fill back up with stored energy.
The sources mention a very specific phenomenon here, gaining 3 to 8 pounds of healing water weight. I can hear guys panicking already, thinking the carbs are making them fat.
They must not panic, because every single gram of glycogen stored in the muscle requires 3 grams of water to hold it there. This is not adipose tissue. This is intensely hydrating the cells, creating a full, dense muscle belly and stabilizing your baseline energy.
So it's good weight.
It is a sign of healing.
Okay, weeks 3 and 4. What happens as the energy stabilizes?
This is when the crucial T4 to T3 thyroid conversion starts coming back online. Your liver, finally fueled by abundant glycogen, can efficiently activate your thyroid hormone.
That's great.
You'll notice your sleep deepens significantly, you'll stop waking up at 3 a.m. from cortisol spikes, and your morning temperatures will start rising naturally without the adrenaline mask.
And weeks 5 and 6, the sources specifically call this period the turning point.
Week 5 and 6 is when the massive physiological shift occurs. Systemic inflammation drops noticeably. The dreaded 3 p.m. afternoon energy crashes completely vanish. And most noticeably, your hands and feet, which may have been cold for years, will get reliably, constantly warm, showing that your metabolism is finally generating enough surplus energy to push blood all the way to your extremities.
And the ultimate long-term payoff, months 3 to 6 and beyond.
That is when you see full, robust hormonal restoration. The aromatase factory has finally powered down, the cortisol seesaw has balanced, the morning wood and daytime libido return with force. And based on extensive clinical observations within the bioenergetic community, a man's natural testosterone can double or even triple, jumping from a dismal 200 to over 600 or 700 nanograms per deciliter without a single exogenous injection.
From 200 to 700, simply by giving the cellular factory what it needs to turn the lights back on.
By fixing the systemic energy deficit.
This has been an absolutely massive worldview-altering paradigm shift. But as we bring this grand synthesis to a close, we need to be very precise about our message. The bioenergetic model is not a blanket, dogmatic condemnation of TRT under all possible circumstances. We aren't saying that all modern medicine is evil and that injections are always wrong for every single human being.
No, not at all. There are rare, legitimate cases of genuine primary hypogonadism, where the physical testicular tissue is irrevocably damaged by trauma, disease, or extreme chemical exposure. In those cases, exogenous support is necessary.
Right. What we are offering today is a radical reframe of the modern pervasive epidemic of low T. The core message is this: low testosterone in a stressed, under-eating, PUFA-loaded, overtrained man is a completely fixable symptom of an energy deficit. It is not a standalone disease, and it is certainly not a natural, inevitable diagnosis of aging.
It is the body intelligently, purposefully adapting to a hostile, low-energy environment in order to keep you alive.
And that brings us right back to that cold doctor's office where we started. If you are sitting there with that lab report, I want you to realize something profound. You aren't broken. Your body isn't betraying you. It is protecting you. I want you to view testosterone entirely as a report card on your cellular energy. It is not a standalone knob on a dashboard that you need to artificially crank up with a needle. Fix the metabolism, give the microscopic factory the raw materials it needs to thrive, turn off the stress alarms, and the hormone numbers frequently take care of themselves.
When you remove the systemic stress, the human body naturally, inevitably returns to a state of abundance and vitality.
Exactly. So fix the environment, stop the seed oils, eat the carbs, heal the gut, and watch the report card change. But as we wrap up this deep dive into the bioenergetic model, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought based on everything we've explored today. If the supposedly inevitable decline of male hormones and the entire onset of what we casually accept as aging is actually just a symptom of a completely reversible cellular energy crisis, what other permanent, debilitating age-related health conditions are we simply starving into existence?